Welcome to the Storycraft Cafe. Come in, grab a cup of your favorite beverage, and get ready to join the storytelling conversation. Storycraft Cafe is brought to you by Dabble, the ultimate cloud-based fiction writing software. Here we're going to bring together storytellers from all walks to encourage and empower you to craft your best story. Thanks for joining us on our 100th episode of the Storycraft Cafe podcast. I'm so glad you joined us today. We have a phenomenal show. It's with gaming legend John Romero. And you might think, well, why do you have a gaming legend on the show? Well, John Romero is one of the founders of id Software, and id Software changed the landscape of games and brought storytelling into it. And John also just published his autobiography, and it is a fantastic book. So we talk about not only his contributions to storytelling and gaming, but what it's like to gather all those thoughts and put it into a book that other people can hold and, dig all into. It's a fantastic conversation. John is an amazing guy. I know you're going to love it. Thank you for joining us for 100 episodes. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can listen to all 100 episodes. Also, join us on our YouTube page where you can join in live to the conversation. Lots and lots more to come. Subscribe. Stay tuned. Now on to our show with John Romero. And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I'm your host, as always, Hank Garner. Today, man, I am super excited for this show. I've, all weekend, all I could think about was this show coming up with one of my heroes. John Romero is here on the show with me. He's got a brand new book that, if you're listening to this live, today is release day. And the book is Doom Guy, Life in First Person by John Romero. And if you are not familiar with John Romero, he was one of the co-founders of id Software, and one of the guys that created first person shooters and this whole genre of gaming that what was it, 25, almost 30 years ago, that kind of got all this stuff started, and, has changed storytelling. The way we think about it now has changed because of the work that John and his compatriots, did, a couple of decades ago. And here we are in 2023. And John has told his story, one of my favorite books of all time, probably in my top 5 books, is Masters of Doom by David Kushner. And I discovered that book a number of years ago. And John is one of the guys that is, that the book is about. And I always loved that book. And the audio book, narrated by Will Wheaton, is amazing. And then when I heard that you, John, were going to tell your side of the story from your vantage point and your words, I was super stoked. So here we are. The book is out today. Welcome to the show, John.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm excited to talk about the book.
Absolutely. The book is your story. What was it like? Well, first off, that book that introduced a lot of people to you and the work that you did, Masters of Doom. How did you feel about the book when it came out?
Well, I was happy with the book. It was well written, it was exciting, and David did a lot of research. He spent about 5 years researching and writing the book. So yeah, it's definitely it's good.
Yeah, there were obviously parts of the story that you wanted to add your perspective to. When did that become something that you were thinking about? David did a great job on this, but maybe there were some things that he just couldn't know because he didn't live inside your head. When did you start thinking about telling the story in your way?
Geez, there's so many stories that could be told, you know. There've been a lot in magazines, definitely in Masters of Doom, YouTube videos. There's been a lot out there, but there hasn't been a book about my whole story from when I was a kid, you know, which was not covered in the book, in Masters of Doom. And, you know, what's kind of interesting, the way it came about was that I was giving a talk at a conference in Canada, and the conference organizers asked me to talk about my life instead of the games I made. They want to know how did I become the person who made those games instead of talking about the games. And I said, okay. So I wrote a talk called My Life in Games, and the audience was kind of shocked when I talked about how I was brought up and where I lived and all that kind of stuff, because it wasn't out there anywhere. And so somebody had basically said, you know, that should really be in a book. And I thought about it, and I thought, you know, there also is not a definitive id Software game history book either, you know, and game history is super important to me. Yeah. It's important to, you know, to a lot of people. And so it was interesting, you know, it was important for me to get like the exact dates that games were made, what they were about, what they were called, because there has been some confusion over the years about things like Hover Tank 1. It's not called Hover Tank 3D, you know. But yeah, and I thought, yeah, this could double as a game, like an id Software game history book, and serve obviously as my, you know, as my memoir / autobiography. And, you know, Masters of Doom does a really great job of telling the story, and a lot of people really love that book. And I'm excited to actually add this book out there as well. It doesn't take away from Masters of Doom. I think it just adds a lot more information. Yeah.
I am 51 years old, so I am that point in my life where nostalgia is a very strong thing, you know. And as a kid who in middle school and high school was really into computers, and you know, the personal computer revolution was happening, and you know, these were magical you know, devices that you know, you had to get in and figure out how they worked, and you had to write software and all of this stuff. And now I look at my kids, and you know, the computer is just an appliance. You know, it's just you know, everybody has one. Everybody's phone is a computer. You know, and they're just so taken for granted. And there's something about hearing about the early days of you know, how this technology was coming alive, and how guys like you were looking at this technology and thinking of new things that you could do with it. And I think that that's one of the most important things about game history, computer history, that has to be told, because this was a different time with a different way of thinking than it is now.
Yeah, it's you know, I think a lot of times when people read about game history, it's like, back in this year, this is what was out, instead of a story that's written from that time. Like, right. And I used to go into the arcades and I would play pinball games in these dark caverns, and, you know, talk about what was so great about pinball, and like, what is this? Here's the new electromechanical game, and then here's a video game. And so I was there. I was super lucky to grow up during the pinball to video game to home computer transition. Like, when I started to learn how to code, almost no one had a computer in their house. You know, I didn't know anyone with a computer at home because it was brand new. It was a personal computer revolution just beginning. So, you know, but I was there where, at least where it counted for me, which is in the arcades, playing those games, absorbing the design lessons of those games, and deciding that that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. When you decided to write the book, you mentioned in the book, and this is worth mentioning, that that your memory is exceptional, and I think there's an actual term for it, and I can't remember the term, but I'm sure you'll fill us in. But you have this uncanny ability to remember very specific things. When did you realize that?
Probably in the early 2000s, when things that happened long ago were not being recalled by people that I knew were around back then.
Yeah.
Like a certain amount of years, 20 years or so, maybe 30. And it was like, that's funny, because I know myself a couple people who have the same kind of memory that I have, but that's out of everyone I know. And so, it was interesting, and as I got older, the more apparent it was that, like, it's weird that I can remember things instantly, like they happened yesterday, So yeah, it's something that I've heard. It's something that I've heard for a while, because people are like, "How do you remember that?" And it's like, how do you not remember that?
Right.
Because to me, it was like, it's weird that you're forgetting things.
Yeah, right. Well, that had to be super helpful when you're recalling stories from the late 80s, early 90s, and you can place yourself back there again. That had to when you're. I would imagine that when you start thinking about telling the story, did you kind of sketch out the parts of the story that you wanted to tell, or how did? I'm always kind of fascinated by memoir or autobiography, because most of the time what you're telling is kind of a window into your life, and then when you're deciding that, how do you decide what the window is going to be? When you start kind of sketching out what this story was going to portray, how did you decide, where do I pick up? What are the highlights of the story? What will people find interesting? How did you kind of start doing inventory of your story to come up with those?
Well, I think first it was like, well, this is an autobiography and I want to cover everything from the very beginning. So it's like, okay, it's my whole life. It's not like just a little part of my life. So yeah. It was important to come up with an outline. What are the major sections of my life, like where big things changed, right? Come up with a good outline where those are major changes, and then start recalling all of the things that happened in that time. And what was the funny thing about hyperthymesia is that I think most everything is important.
Right.
That happened back then. It's like,
I can remember it all, therefore you need to know.
Yeah, I can remember it all, so they must be important. And it's also like, I can say, here's a detail, and it's important. It's an important detail because it connects these things together, but like a lot of people just want the high points. They want to know these things. So it was a lot of work to just like take that ROM dump and just like edit it down to like the things that were really important. But yeah, it was I know what fans have asked about, and I know what I'd like to know about other games too. So it was like, yeah, what do people really want to know? So distilling down all the key moments that led to other key moments was really important to making sure that the book held together cohesively, and it was always like addressing things that people would want to hear and less things that they wouldn't. But if I've thought that there was a detail that was important that would give more insight into things that they know, then that was important to put in there, because I did want to put into the book a lot of information that no one has seen anywhere else. Well,
and speaking of that, with Masters of Doom, it really focuses on those early days of id Software, and there's a little bit of backstory for Carmack and a little bit of backstory for you, but you really don't get the full picture. Whereas in Doom Guy, you give us a very real glimpse into your upbringing and some very trying, tumultuous times. When you're talking about parents and step parents and interactions with them, and the difficulties of growing up in a new world where technologies are brand new and where older people don't understand them, and all of this kind of thing. When you're thinking about that part of your life, and and telling stories, and this is the one difficult thing I would think about telling autobiography is that it's not just your story. There's like a whole cast of characters that are real people. And, are you ever, kind of treading lightly so that you don't hurt someone's feelings? I mean, even the id Software stuff, you guys were best friends that, some of those friendships kind of blew up and then reconcile later. But there's some difficult things to talk about. How do you start kind of trudging into that?
Well, at first there's like a decision to either write about that stuff or not. And to me, it felt like it was important for me to put in the difficult upbringing and things that happened to me while I was being raised, because if my story is going to be helpful to anybody, having people relate to my situation is really important for them to feel like they can actually do something too. Right. So it's like if somebody is like, that's happened to me before. And like that made me never want to do whatever. And it's like, but he did do that. And it's like, I can do that too. So it's really, I think, helpful for people to see that, yes, you can do this. Anybody can do this if you just maybe do it this way or just even see that it's totally doable. And there wasn't any magic in how any of it happened. So it was just a lot of time spent working, on stuff. Yeah. But yeah, the upbringing was important to talk about because it affected the kinds of games that I made, the things that I used to draw, the comics I drew, the stories I would write, all of everything. It was all part of that exposure to your environment, But there's things that I left out, out of respect to other people. It's not a tell-all book, but if anything, though, if anything, like one of the biggest end points of the book is, and even while going through the book was I was hoping to get across the fact that I was really grateful to have an entire life in games. And that other people could do the same as well if they dedicated themselves to it. Yeah,
you mentioned the comics and the writing stories because you talk about that in the book. That this was a very big part of your life. When did you first realize that you had the storytelling gene? We like to refer to sometime as. That you could tell stories and that you could, take a piece of paper and you could create a new reality.
I think I started with just drawing, because if I'm going to convey anything, at least at that time, artistic talent was the natural thing for me because my grandfather on my mom's side was artistic. He was a painter and he could draw as well. So I just naturally did that first. And with writing, I never claimed to be a really great writer. It was, but it's something that really takes a lot of time to develop. But like the idea of coming up with story ideas, was I think it was just kind of came natural because if you play games or you watch movies, you're exposed to lots of stories nonstop. And so because the thing I loved doing was playing these games or watching these movies or even reading books, I've read so many books. It just kind of came natural. It's like entertainment is stories. Entertainment is people going through a story and experiencing the thing. And people just like to do that. And like they do it for a specific amount of time and then they do another one. And that's why there's so many books out there constantly, because people like to read these stories and they move on to the next one. It's like you can just keep on burning through this content. And so, it's just like I can make some stories, people might not live in them for too long, but it might provide an interesting, weird space for them to be in. So I just got used to creating these weird spaces and these stories with my games. I just kind of put them together. I put them together in comics. I also put them together in games. And my culture coming from my native background is a total culture of oral tradition of stories, storytelling and passing knowledge through the generations that way. So it just felt really, natural. My dad was Yaqui, and our family would get together and barbecue in the backyard and tell stories. And, those stories were never, the stories that, as a native / Mexican, you never feel like these stories were, oh, that's a story from the 1800s. It's a story. And,
right.
and the reason why it's told is because it's still relevant and it's important to tradition and heritage. So yeah, all the songs, all the stories, all that stuff is relevant, and that's why it's being told. And it doesn't feel like it's imprinted in time. It feels like it's timeless. And so, like, when I create spaces or create stories, I feel like I'm trying to create something that should be timeless. It should be something that you can always kind of go back to.
In the early days of id Software, you guys had a running D&D game that you guys played, and a lot of your games that you published came out of or were inspired by this running D&D game that you guys had. I've always been kind of fascinated by the collaborative storytelling that happens around tabletop games. How did that influence your game making and how you thought about including other people? And I think your Yaqui oral tradition probably plays into that at some point, because it's all weirdly connected in a way.
Yeah, which is also something that really is instrumental in my level design process as well. But what was the last thing you said? The last question?
How all of these things are connected to, the collaborative storytelling nature.
Yeah. So D&D, right? The D&D games that we played, D&D is such a unique space to be in, because when you are reading a book, you're reading something that someone has written that you are experiencing as you read it. And playing a game, you are experiencing a game as it was programmed and designed, and it doesn't really do much outside of that, right? So D&D is a space that is real time, and it can be anything, and it can go anywhere. So really good DMs, or GMs, however,
right?
70s we call them DMs, Dungeon Masters. They can, they're ready for the party to do anything really different and crazy if they're really imaginative. And those are the very best games, is to play with someone who can take you anywhere. And that it was always like D&D was always the best game that you could play. Like, you can't make a game on a computer that can replicate that, because still the data that's on the computer is static and pre-created for specific stuff, right? For a specific environment and story. And D&D is just your mind, and the DM just explains what the new situation is and where you decided to go, and they take you there, and it's limitless. And that was always, it's always like, it's great to in at an early age encounter the limitless creativity of a game space like Dungeons and Dragons, and hope that you can even reach that someday, and it is great. It's great to have been exposed to that, and those decisions that people would make in the party, the things that happened because of those decisions, those are all part of an experience that I would remember. And I would remember that in a game design sense, where I'm like going to build a new game or a new space. And I'll remember it was so crazy when we decided that we were going to go do this. And I ended up in the dimensional pocket in someone's castle. And not be touched by anybody, and do some crazy stuff while I was there. And like, that weird scenario was just like, oh, I could put something like that in this level, where the player goes through this teleporter and they end up in a space that they can't get out of unless they, and so it's like, you can kind of relate the coolness of that open-ended D&D thing to something you're working on right then. So I just found it to be D&D to be, the ultimate game. And because we played so intensely for so long in the D&D world together, when we came up with an idea for a game like Quake, or we come up with an idea for Doom, there's so much behind that we experienced.
Right.
There was so many hours of us just absorbing the situations that we were put in because we were around this character or because we were in this certain environment. And it was great because D&D will provide, a great DM is going to provide you with lots of surprises, unexpected things, mystery, fear, all of that stuff. And that's all of that, like knowing that you came through a great D&D session is like, I need to recreate this in the game. How do I make fear and curiosity and, surprises happen in a space I'm designing? And it's like, you have a reference for it and you know how it happened. How can I recreate that in the constraints of what I've made already? And so it's like, it's great. It's always a game, a lot of game design is transposing something and changing it and putting it in something else, Yeah.
As someone whose pulse is on the cutting edge of gaming, still today, do you think that we'll get that sort of interaction that you get around a D&D table? Do you think we'll eventually get to experience that in computer or console gaming?
I think so. I think we're going to get there.
Yeah. I was interested to hear that you mentioned Quake just a minute ago. In the book, you talked about the how much backstory was in this Quake character and what you envisioned this game to be, and then the reality of what you guys delivered was very different because of all kind of constraints, and you have to read the book to get the full story. But I had no idea that there was so much that you wanted to be in this game that ultimately didn't make it to the market. What is that like when you the having to compromise and your vision as the creator is one thing, then what you actually get to deliver is not always what you hoped.
Well, in game development, the rule is that the idea of the game that you think you're going to make is not going to be the game that comes out, because really good games that are built in an organic way are going to change as you develop them, because you are going to be taking advantage of all the good stuff that happens while you're play testing and adding more code to the game and adding more features and see how they work together, and then tweak the game in response to those things. So you have an idea of what you want, and as it's being made, the game is revealing itself, and then you're making decisions around making sure it's focused in the right direction always. And so that process is why the games are always changing as you're developing them. With Quake, it was a drastic change. We knew all through 1995 exactly what the story of the game was. But when we got to the point where we were going to start making the gameplay part of the game, because of the original idea that we had, it was going to be like an R&D, another R&D segment of development, and we had just spent a whole year doing R&D on just the technology part, and the team just was just tired. They just wanted to finish the game. They didn't want to figure out what new way can we make a game in a 3D engine. Right. So it was like, we're just going to finish the game. We're going to make it a shooter. It'll be the best shooter we can make with the technology that we just created, and with what we've already kind of made. And so, yeah, it was a tired team, but we had amazing success with Doom and Doom 2 shooters. They just want to get it done. We're going to make a great shooter. So our team was really used to going 100 miles an hour, and they didn't want to spend another year on R&D. They wanted to finish it. So that's what we decided to do. And obviously it turned out really great. Personally, I wanted to make that other game, and I just felt that at that point I just didn't feel like tech and design were balanced anymore. But Quake was exactly the game that it needed to be.
Your history with game making goes back to the 80s with some fairly simple games, and then even when id Software began, you guys did 6 chapters of Commander Keen, I think it was, and then the Wolfenstein, and then Doom and Quake, and all of the cutting edge stuff. To look at the progression of game design then to now, where we have these massive budget cinematic games, these AAA games that are rivaling and beating most, Hollywood movies for budget and for money earned, especially these days, that's, games have become this huge immersive form of entertainment. And I have a friend who's owns a small press publisher, and he tells me all the time, man, games are where the best storytelling are right now. That this is the cutting edge of storytelling right now, is what's going on in these AAA games. How do you see, you have a very unique vantage point from, being someone who's still in game design, but you have this great memory to look back over the game progression as we've seen it, and see the growth. There was something really interesting about early games where you had 3 lives, and if once you died, you were it. That was it. You had to start all over from the beginning. Whereas now games are this immersive experience where you get to live through a character. And how do you feel about where games are now and where they've come from?
They're so amazing now. I couldn't have even imagined what games are today back then. Yeah. There just wasn't a way to even think that. Really, D&D was as good as it could get back then.
Yeah.
So it's been amazing to see the development of games really splinter into so many different places, to see the emergence of narrative games and narrative games that really embrace new technology, like What Remains of Edith Finch, using the Unreal Engine and telling a story in an innovative way. I just love it. It's like that's what the game industry is about, just experimentation. And really, still, Hollywood is amazing. There's incredible talent in Hollywood. Now more than ever, there are more people writing new stuff for all of these streaming channels that never existed before. And people take ideas from all over the place. Game developers can take some ideas from some Hollywood movies or scripts, and likewise, Hollywood can take some ideas from things that games are doing well. The industries are slowly converging because the technologies that we're using to make games are using to make movies too. And, and so things get closer and closer, and it really becomes the platform that you're on, Yeah. And other than a TV where you're just sitting there for entertainment, which is totally fine, because when you look at the range of entertainment out there, there's very involved games that are like grand strategy games or really complex RPGs that will take all of your hours in a day, and this highly complex thinking nonstop. It's just will consume you, all the way down to, let's say, match 3 games, or games that are just more turn-based and lighter, more casual, right? The ultimate casual entertainment is going to be sitting there watching something, and you don't have to interact with it. You just need to watch it. And so I see movies, on that scale, somewhere. And so I don't think that games are taking away from it. I think that there's a lot of symbiotic, creativity happening between those areas, and we're seeing them kind of very slowly merge right now.
Yeah. As a game designer, you are used to working collaboratively with a team, and to bring this product to market. When writing this book, Doom Guy, there's a lot of time where writing a book is a solitary endeavor. It's just you and the story that you're getting out. But at some point it becomes a collaborative effort. You bring in an editor and they have a fresh set of eyes and, make suggestions and, then you work on another draft and, you kind of go back and forth with an editor and then eventually a publisher. And, then that's a whole other set of people with opinions and all of this. What was that collaborative process like on working on this book?
It was really great. There were a lot of people involved in this. It was important that the things I was putting down, I wasn't going to just rely 100% on my memory. I needed to make sure. I needed to verify with John Carmack, Adrian Carmack, Tom Hall, and other people to make sure that the key details that are in there, that they remember them the same way. And if there was any diversions, that we talked about it to make sure that it was correct. I wanted this to be a totally correct history of id Software. But yeah, when you talk about the collaboration, as my wife is a writer, she's a really great writer, and she worked with me to get the hyperthymesia ROM dumps in the right order and written and edited. And, with the publisher, there's a great big team there working on editing. Connor Leonard was our editor. He was really great. I really liked him. There's the media people who know exactly what, how that they want to get the word out there. There's even like legal checks. You have to make sure that you're not writing something that, that could get anybody in hot water. But yeah, the early readers, really important people that they're responding to it and saying, I really like these stories or this aspect of it. There's a lot of people involved. Yeah, it wasn't just it wasn't just me. It was a lot of people. And when you work with a really strong team, you're going to get a really strong book. And really the fans who are asking questions year after year after year are really important to make sure that I'm addressing all of their questions. I'm giving them answers like, where's Black Room? I've been asked that for years, and of course, only a certain number of people are going to know that. And I wanted to make sure over the years, I've never talked about Black Room, and I put it in the book because here's a story that people, really wanted. But, I wouldn't have this story without the people in my life and the incredible teams that I've worked with. And so, this is it. This is the story. These are the people. And this is what happened.
All right. 6 or 7 years ago, I think it was, Richard Garriott of Ultima fame published a book that was part biography and part thoughts about current events. It was a really interesting book. But we got a glimpse into video game history through his eyes. Ken Williams of Sierra fame published a book in the last year or two where he told the early story of Sierra Online. And now your book, and then, a couple of contributions from other folks. We're starting to get a unified history of computer gaming. And have you talked with other people that maybe have seen what you're doing with this book and maybe are inspired to tell their little corner of computing and video game history?
Well, I haven't gone out specifically to say, hey, you should tell your story. It's kind of like, it's funny because it's so much work.
Yeah.
It is a major decision to decide that you're going to tell your story because it takes a long time and it's a lot of effort. And to do it right, you want to make sure you're doing it right because if you don't do it really well, then people won't want to cite your book as a source for the game histories that we're talking about. So it is a big endeavor to try and do that. But, there are plenty of people out there that's like, oh, I really wish Doug Carlston would write another book. And in fact, Doug Carlston wrote a really great book back in 1980, I think it was 4, called Software People, that was about the industry right then and how it started. And, there are a bunch of other history books like that where people did write stuff, but, the people who were the leaders of the industry back then, but not everybody knows that these books exist.
Yeah. The publisher sent me a early release version of the audiobook, and I absolutely loved it. You narrated the audiobook. What was that experience like? Not only to write your story, but then to perform it. And was that kind of a full circle moment for you?
It was really cool. I thought, I thought that people, fans would want to hear the author narrate it. It's like, how would he, when he wrote these words, how would he say them, instead of someone else interpreting how they would be said.
Right.
So I thought that would be cool. It is yet again another massive effort to go and record all of it, because it's never perfect, and you redo lines over and over. It could be one line that you screw up 10 times, and the book has got a lot of pages in it and a lot of words. So I worked with this amazing sound producer, Dahi, and he was just so fun to work with. He's a gamer. He had a really amazing studio, and we would go out there and just knock it out. And I have to come back and do edits, and just, it was a big process to try and get it out there. But I thought, I want to make sure that I'm saying the words that I wrote, and it sounds the way I would say them. So yeah, and it's unique. I mean, it's just like, not everybody gets to hear the author read their own book.
Right.
And, I might not write another one. So this is it,
Was absolutely phenomenal. And you can go grab your copy of Doom Guy Life in First Person by John Romero. It's out everywhere today. Go visit your local bookstore, support local books. If you don't have a great local bookstore, we're going to put links in the show notes where you can grab it from Amazon, or go to Audible and get the audiobook narrated by John himself. John Romero, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. We're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of the new book.
Thank you very much. It's been great being on here, and thanks for all the really great questions.
That's our episode for today. There's so much more to come as we talk to authors about the craft of writing, but also the business of publishing. Be sure to subscribe to the Storycraft Cafe podcast in your favorite podcast app so that you never miss an episode. The Storycraft Cafe is made possible by Dabble. Writing a book is challenging. Your writing tool should not be. Dabble is an easy-to-use online writing tool packed with helpful features that allow beginning novelists and published authors to create amazing stories. Visit us at dabblewriter.com and start your free trial today. Thanks for listening.